At the edge of a frozen field, dawn unfolds slowly. Pale light seeps over snow-dusted barley, the stalks skeletal, brittle, bowed by ice. Frost cracks underfoot as a gloved hand kneels, brushing powdery white from the roots. A turnip small, gnarled, stubborn breaks in two. From its center, a curl of steam rises like a ghost, drifting toward the sky's dull silver. A voice, quiet and urgent, barely louder than the wind. When winter's grip choked the fields, peasants didn't starve, they thrived on foods now lost to time. Cut to waves lapping against a rocky shoreline. A figure stoops, pulling strands of seaweed from the black surf, hands red with cold. The tide breathes. The harvest continues. Inside, a turf-roofed longhouse, bowls clatter against a wooden table. Thick gruel, ladled from a steaming pot, fills the room with warmth, and the sour tang of fermented cabbage coils through the peat smoke. Smoke curls from the roof vent, trailing into pale sky. Outside, the land still sleeps. Inside, life clings close to the fire. A child lifts a wooden spoon to her lips. Steam dances. A bell tolls softly in the distance. Tonight, we unearth the forgotten foods that fueled the hardest lives and kept whole villages alive. A longhouse door groans open, the iron hinges shrieking against the storm outside. Wind screams in, driving snow across the packed earth floor. Leans into it, her cloak crusted with frost, hair clinging damp to her cheeks. She enters in silence, breath shallow, and kneels by a warped wooden plank. Her fingers red rowan tie the basket at her hip. She lifts seaweed from its coils, tangled with driftwood mushrooms, still wet from the tide. Salt gleams along their edges. To her, it looks like treasure. From the dark shore, a frozen net creaks as it's pulled from the surf. Kale stands barefoot on iced stones, his beard clotted with frost. Herring tumble from the mesh, stiff as sticks, their glassy eyes catching no light. He doesn't flinch, just tips them into a waiting tub of brine, jaw set against the cold. Crouched over another heap of kelp, scrapes salt crystals from the fronds into a wooden scoop. Her movements are slow, but Sharich flake another thread in the village's lifeline. Inside the longhouse, smoke snakes toward the beams. Astrid, the cook's daughter, leans into the hearth's flickering heat, feeding it with kindling. Into the bubbling pot, she drops handfuls of dried nettles and brittle lichen, whispering words older than memory. The pot hisses. Outside, the howl of wolves rises. Villagers press round shields to the slitted windows, ears tuned to the dark. The broth thickens, green and steaming. Runa lifts a carved spoon, dips it, tastes. Her eyes widen. The heat races across her face, flushing her cheeks. She swallows slowly, then breathes out a single, reverent exhale. In the dead of winter, flavor was not luxury, it was survival. Astrid looks up, hands soot-smudged, voice steady. We will not go hungry. The fire crackles, wind lashes the walls. Then darkness, the screen bursts to life, fluorescent and overfull. A sleek supermarket stretches in endless aisles, each shelf groaning with abundance. Kale, mango, pomegranate, pre-washed, spin. A shopper glides past with practiced ease, tossing quinoa into her basket without a glance. In the corner, LED grow lights cast a cool violet hue on racks of microgreens farmed indoors, curated for presentation. The voice cuts in, calm but pressing. Our shelves sag with global choice. Avocados in winter. Papayas in Sweden. Yet this bounty hides a loss we barely notice. Cut to drawings elegant, forgotten. Skirit, Alexander's Aurak. Names whispered from the edge of memory. Over 1,000 vegetables once nourished Northern Europe, now vanished, their flavors, nutrients, and stories lost to silence. Each plant sketch fades like a ghost, another thread of history pulled loose. A Viking larder, bundles of dried roots hang low in a smoke-darkened hall. Smoked marrow bones glint beside pickled fish and tightly wrapped bundles of nettles and seaweed. A modern pantry, plastic tubs of overnight oats, shrink-wrapped energy bars, a freezer stocked with microwavable meals. They preserved marrow in smoked bone. We refrigerate sliced ham in plastic. Their nutrition came from patience hours from packaging. The image flickers, Srastrid trudges through snow, cutting back a clump of nettles, her hands bare. In another frame, a modern man sprays herbicide at dandelions on his suburban lawn, grimacing at the weeds. To the Vikings, nettles weren't nuisance, they were medicine, mineral, meal. We pay $12 for ancient grains, yet rip out what once saved lives. Now, a new pairing, seaweed broth, steam curling gently from a wooden bowl. Beside it, a glowing green smoothie in clear glass, topped with a chia seed flourish. They didn't fear the forest, they fed from it. In every root, every brine tub, was resilience. They saw food not as product, but as partnership. The screen holds, stillness settles. The two bowls remain ancient broth and modern blend two forms of survival face to face. One forged in scarcity, the other in surplus, and somewhere between them, a choice. For centuries, history told us a single truth, that medieval peasants, come winter, simply starved. But beneath the ash of ancient hearths, something else remains. Traces of pollen, charred seeds, fossils invisible to the naked eye. In a lab, a microscope reveals the past nettle grains, wild pea fragments, apple skins turned carbon over time. A gloved hand gently brushes soil from a blackened seed. Voice overlays the images, steady and bright. Rural diets were far more diverse than we thought, says archaeobotanist Dr. Liv Thorson. They didn't just survive, they adapted. Nettles, ground, elder, wild apples. Their table was the forest, their pharmacy, the field. And it wasn't just nutrition, it was ritual. In a torchlit reenactment, a bowl of thick gruel is passed hand to hand. Salt is sprinkled over it, not just for flavor, but for blessing. A child places mushrooms into a carved bowl, guided by a woman's hand, as others begin to hum an old chant. The first nettle stew of springs served with ceremony, not just hunger. Food was sacred, shared, sang over, and it lasted. Sun-dried roots hang in smoke-darkened rafters. Fish curl on racks above pizza vents. Bundles wrapped in moss lower into the earth-cool. Stable, shielded from time, they used smoke like we use refrigeration. The voice continues. Even peat bogs became pantries dark and microbial, preserving meat for months. Peat storage, stable temperatures year-round, shelf life months. Yet survival wasn't without danger. Reindeer lichen simmers in a clay pot. Next to it, a ferment jar froths quietly. Ink-cap mushrooms dry on a reed mat, their toxic potential transformed by patience and precision. These weren't desperate foods. They were delicacies of danger poison turned to protein through boiling, fermenting, drying. This wasn't mere survival. It was ingenuity carved in brine and smoke. Ritual made edible. From famine foods to superfoods, Viking peasants mastered a culinary science long forgotten. Now, we retrace their steps through bogs and barns, ruins and recipes, to reclaim the lifelines that once fed a people and might just feed us again. Join us as we enter the lost larders of the past. The pantry beneath the soil, at the edge of S Lake, Morning mist coils above dark water. A long core tube rises slowly from the sediment, streaked with time. Each layer a season, each fleck of pollen, a breath from 1,000 years ago. Inside the lab, a gloved hand adjusts the slide. Under the lens, barley grains glow golden. Nettle pollen flickers like ash. These pollen cycles reveal a seasonal dance, the voice explains. Fields harvested by hand, hedgerows scoured for leaves and seed. Dr. Freya Lundquist leans into the camera, eyes lit. Peasant diets combined grain staples with wild greens winter stores, mixing with spring harvests. We're not just charting agriculture, we're mapping resilience. A year's rhythm measured not in calendars, but in plant, dust and ash. Beneath the old hearths of Hiddeby, archaeologists brush back soot to reveal something once ordinary charred field peas. Fragments of bracken tips, split hazelnut shells, meals reduced to cinders. But the story survives. These weren't just kitchen scraps, the narration breathes. These were hunger's companions, boiled, roasted, ground down until they gave everything. Dr. Lundquist points to the tiny, blistered remains. Charred peas show they weren't ornamental. They stepped in for grain when harvests failed. Imagine the air, smoke and earth, a bubbling pot of survival over a fire too small to waste. In these fragments, resourcefulness. A recipe forged in necessity. The midden trenches stink of mud and history. A coprolite fossilized human wasters split open under light. Inside, fish scales, crustacean shells, heather pollen. It's not glamorous, the narrator concedes. But this is dinner, digested and discarded. In a quiet lab, a technician turns a sample beneath the light. Tiny spine fragments shimmer. Heather pollen, says Professor Leif Gunvalson, likely from herbal tea or seasoning something soothing. Something intentional. Here in excrement lies proof of creativity. Even waste carries whispers of adaptation. Every fragment is a confession. We survived, and this is how. A skull rests under harsh lab light. Long bones beside it carry the record of meals no one remembers. Bone collagen reveals an unexpected truth: up to 50% of dietary protein came not from field or herd, but from sea. Herring, mussels, cod, they were farming people, the voice notes, but their bones speak of tides. Data overlays swirl across the skeleton, isotope bands lighting up as saltwater signatures. Professor Gunvalson speaks plainly. Their marine diet shaped stronger bones and richer nutrition than wheat alone ever could. The sea wasn't backup, it was pantry, provider and protector. Weeds, that's what we'd call them now. But to Viking peasants, they were lifelines. Under magnification, the delicate geometry of a ground elder seed emerges. Dandelion root, wild moss, they ate what nature gave them, says Lundquist. Roots, sea greens, lichens, not just domesticated cereals. A slow-motion shot of boiling root broth rises in steam. This wasn't cuisine. It was commitment. Moss in the pot wasn't a last resort. It was the plan. The difference between starvation and strength was found in the bitter and the overlooked. In a dig pit, a ceramic shard glints under sunlight. In a nearby lab, chemical graphs rise evidence of dairy lipids, buttermilk, cheese, preserved in clay. The narration softens. Grain wasn't the whole story. Dairy carried them through the dark months. Calories, fat, vitamins, endurance. A painted vessel is reconstructed in CGI, milk poured, curd set, butter churned. Professor Gunvalson returns. Mixed diets, grains, greens, fish, and herds made nutritional diversity a lifeline. Nothing was wasted. Nothing depended on one crop. This was balance, born of necessity and of trust in land and herd alike. Buried deep in a peat grave, a jar is unearthed. Inside, preserved fragments of mushrooms, species known to be toxic unless treated. A clay pot simmers on fire. The mushrooms foam gently, transforming under heat. These weren't indulgences, says Lundquist, they were delicacies of danger ritualized, mastered. Toxic to the untrained, nourishment to the skilled. Each preparation a prayer against poison. Each meal a gamble turned sacred routine. The final image blooms in motion. A digital tapestry unfurls, roots stretch into fields of barley. Water pools shimmer with herring and mussels. Trees hang heavy with hazelnuts. Kelp waves beneath waves. Lines connect everything, each part feeding the next. A system, not a list, a living web. This was their pantry, tentacled, tidal, foraged, farmed, fermented. A final pan across the composite map. Peat pits, seaweed beds, cellars and smokehouses. This wasn't desperation, it was design. A voice lingers. We rediscover lost flavors, we reclaim survival lessons. And the question hangs, what will we remember? And what will we eat when we truly need to endure? Before the sun stirs, frost quilts the forest in silver silence. Cloaked in furs, walks the edge of a fir grove where shadows stretch long. She kneels into the snow, brushes aside a powdery crust, and reveals juniper berries, crimson and cold as gemstones. Her breath clouds the air as she plucks them, thumb smoothed and quick. Along a birch trunk, chaga mushrooms protrude like coal-colored growths. She scrapes one gently, preserving its dark curl. Beyond the trees, a hidden spring whispers under ice. She slides back mossy stone and dips her hand, pulling strands of sea kelp from a satchel to rinse in the mineral water. The kelp glistens golden and limp, a briny thread against the white. A twig snaps beneath her boot. Icicles tremble above. Her breath hisses. Every resource was reclaimed, from forest berries to tidal weeds woven into the survival fabric. Quiet diligence, every harvest was hope pulled from the earth. Back inside the longhouse, warmth fogs the air as pours kelp prints into a wooden trough. She lays the glistening strands across a rack above salt-lined boards. The salty crystals wink in lamplight, harvested last summer, now precious as coin. Astrid's daughter stands beside her, scooping sea salt from a woven basket, her hand deliberate and small. Enough to cure a leg of venison, Astrid remarks gently from across the hearth. The child nods, measuring again. Moss-lined racks shimmer, salt flakes fall like snow. A lantern sways, soft scraping of salt, rustle of drying greens, whisper between mother and child. Salt wasn't just seasoning, it was insurance. Treasure measured in grains. Cooperation, each gashed, anchored survival. Midday sun filters through frost-thick windows. Kial stands near the peat rack, lifting smoked herring from their hanging line. Their skins, blistered with oil and smoke, crackle at his touch. A knife flashes briefly, then slices through fish with practiced ease. Astrid takes the fillets, folding dried cod strips into bubbling barley gruel simmering in a clay pot. Steam rises, mingling peat scent with the briny waft of preserved fish. Kjol tests a sliver with his fingers, then nods. Richer than fresh catch, he murmurs. Steam drapes the rafters, smoke twines with breath, hands layering food. Bubbling stew, crisp peel of fish skin, fire snapping. Peat smoke was pantry and protector flavor, forging survival. Earthy, briny, warming a hearth in a bowl. A soot-darkened board becomes the stage for nourishment. Thora guides Astrid's daughter, flower-streaked and wide-eyed, through the rhythm of flatbread making. Barley and nettle flour mix in a bowl, sticky with warm water. The child needs her palms pushing and folding as Thora hums an old chant under her breath. Together they pat out thin cakes and place them near the fire to dry into crisp browns. Each turn is a prayer, Thora whispers, tapping the dough. Dough under fingers, a flax basket resting nearby, ash-dusted coals, palm smacks, wood shifting, a child's small giggle. Bread meant warmth, ritual, daily structure, even in cold months. Generational knowledge woven through flour and fire. Nettle leaves and heather sprigs sizzle in a wide-mouthed pot, scenting the room with earth and warmth. Thora stirs slowly, eyes narrowed with thought. Behind her, clay jars await. She presses, beats slices, still purple and firm into brine, sealing them with beeswax warmed by flame. Steam coils around her fingers like mist from a story. The tea is ready. She pours a taste into a wooden cup and murmurs a phrase, neither blessing nor recipe, something older. Violet juice curling like ink, beeswax sheen on jar tops, tea hissing, fire sighing, words barely heard. Food was medicine. Herbs and roots brewed into teas, salads, and cures. Calm reassurance, health preserved one leaf at a time. In the shadowed rear of the longhouse, Astrid lifts venison strips lean, red, already firmed from cold. She layers them in deep wooden vats, dusting each layer with coarse sea salt. Thora, silent beside her, scatters juniper berries between folds, their fragrance sharp and clean. The salt clings. The meat will rest a week, then hang. It will feed them when nothing else grows. A winter's month, packed in a jar, Astrid says, pressing down the lid. Salt snowing over meat, fingers pressing berries, wooden vat dark with age. Salt patters like sand, creak of pot handles, lid sliding home. Salted meat was treasure's simple chemistry, preserving flesh through winter's hunger. Quiet pride each task, a promise kept. Evening wraps the hearth in gold. Around the fire, bowls are passed, stew of chaga and seaweed. Its broth, dark and thick, lifted with spruce tip garnish. Astrid crumbles flatbread into a pot of warm whey, stirring until it softens. Thora lifts her bowl and intones, "May ash and salt keep sickness at bay." They eat slowly, savoring steam, shoulders brushing, silence, not absence, but comfort. A howl echoes beyond the walls. No one flinches. Fire flickers across faces, hands cradle bowls. Wood settling, communal breath, a wolf in distance. Feasts may have been humble, but each meal was community, covenant, celebration. Soft unity, ritual nourished both belly and bond. At 21 o'clock, embers crackle, low. Runa ladles leftover grell thickened into porridge into bowls for the midnight watch. Kiel fastens a smoke lantern above the hearth, its glass catching sparks as it swings. A bowl is handed to Thora, who nods once, grateful. Outside, frost presses against timber like a quiet threat. They eat by steam and shadow. The youngest curls near the fire. No songs, no chatter, no, only the breathing of kin, the whisper of long months still to come. Lantern glow on wood grain, steam spiraling into dark, slow slurps, crackle of fire, silence layered deep. Night watch was shared vigilance, sustained by cold night rations. Quiet determination, every bowl a stand against despair. Beneath a tangle of firs, the family nestles close. Flattens barley cakes for the next dawn. Astrid's daughter wraps a few dried berries in cloth and slips them into her pocket, secret and sweet. Thora sits by the wall, her voice low, recounting a tale of the first thaw, when roots softened and geese returned. Their eyes close, a coal pops, snow drifts settle on the roof above. Moonlight filtering through smoke-smeared window, a hand tucking berries, Cloth rustles, story fades, breath sinks. Before sleep, small axope tucked into pockets, prayers whispered into frost. Fatigue and anticipation, a fragile trust in tomorrow's thaw. Dreams turn to soft ground and green shoots. Under the quilts, stares at the ceiling. In her palm, a single dried berry. She rolls it between finger and thumb, then places it on her tongue. Sweetness rises brief, bright, and gone. Astrid stirs. "What flavor?" she whispers. "Promise." Runa repli. The fire hisses faintly. Somewhere, ice cracks on the eaves. Berry close up, flicker of fire on skin. Embers sigh, breath slows, world hushes. Winter was endurance, but dreams of rejuvenation fueled daily dance. Resilient, hope scarce, but unbroken in the dark. The others sleep, bundled deep. Thora, alone, watches. Her hand turns a coal with the fire iron, coaxing quiet life. She hums not quite melody, not quite prayer. Beside her, the lantern sways, casting gold against wall timbers. Her eyes remain on the fire, unflickering. Behind her, breath, warmth, the soft weight of trust. She guards them not from beast or man, but from forgetting what keeps them whole. Ember reflection in her eyes, silhouette unmoving. Fire's hush, rhythmic breath of sleepers. Even as the household slept, one kept watch, bearing the burden of tomorrow's life. All sacrifice vigil for the sake of many. Before light breaches the tree line, tiptoes across cold floorboards, she kneels beside the hearth and lifts a panel loose. From a pouch wrapped in lichen, she draws her last handful of dried berries, firm, shriveled treasure. She lowers them into the cache and covers them carefully. Nearby, Kiel opens a vat to check the salted fish, replacing the peat lid with care. This food is not for now, but for need. For the night, someone wakes with hunger in their bones. Berry pouch slipping into shadows, hands steady. Wood creaks, salt settles. These hidden caches weren't hoarding, they were lifelines tucked away for when lips cried hunger. Resolute mindfulness, ritual of survival. The first grey of morning breaks. Coals, banked low, glow under ash. Kiel stirs them into flame, feeding small wood chips until the fire leaps. Astrid places yesterday's flatbread by the edge to warm. Steam begins to rise again from stew pot, from cup, from breath. A new day unchanged, sacred. Thora walks to the fire and places her hands above it, absorbing heat like memory. Exhales, cheeks red from firelight. Her eyes search the window. More snow, yes, but light, too. Flame flickers across stone, bowls steaming anew, flatbread sizzling, crackle, exhale, coals shifting. The day ended where it began, around fire, food, and renewal. This ritual sustained flesh and spirit through darkest months. Runa tucks air scarf tighter. Outside, snow falls, but inside, warmth, and another chance to gather, cure, and endure. Flames rose into the star-wrapped sky as villagers circled the Yule bonfire, wooden bowls cupped in gloved hands. The barley gruel inside steamed into the cold, its scent nutty, comforting. Each ladle passed was not just a meal, it was a gesture of belonging, a link in the chain of shared survival. The flicker of fire danced on their faces as they ate slowly, in silence or in murmured thanks. Children dipped fingers into bowls and mimicked their elders' reverence. There was no gluttony here, just enough, and that was sacred. Food was more than fuel. Lit was fate, faith, and folklore woven into every bite. Passing the spoon was passing the torch of community. With each mouthful, they consumed not just sustenance, but the memory of those who once stood in that same circle. Breath fogged in the air above, hanging like prayer. Under the creaking harvest pole, at the autumn equinox, The first bowl of barley gruel was lifted toward the sky. The priestess's voice rose in chant, the rhythm slow, vowels long and curling like smoke. She dipped the ladle into the pot, then poured it back, in letting the offering return to the earth's cauldron. Around her, villagers pressed grain into the soil, with bare fingers, whispering gratitude. The scent of boiled barley and crushed earth filled the air. This wasn't just ritual, it was insurance. A guarantee that the wheel would turn again. That winter wouldn't be the end. Every grain became a promised life, continuing through winter's depths, and when snow blanketed the hills, the memory of warm broth and golden grain would sustain more than the stomach. The ritual didn't ask for abundance, it asked for enough. Enough to survive, to share, to see another harvest. When days shortened and the wind howled through unsealed shutters, fasting began. Gone were the thick gruels and seed-studded loaves. In their place, thin fish broth, salted lightly, sometimes just waywarmed with herbs. Snow gathered at the window panes like cold witnesses. Fishermen, faces raw from wind, shared what they could. Bowls carried slivers of cod, a nettle leaf, a shred of root enough to remind the body of food without burdening it. These were not acts of deprivation, but preparation. A winter cleansing of the flesh, a clearing of space for endurance, a pause as sacred as a feast. Appetite was tempered by ritual, every skim of fat an act of discipline. Children learned to savor the bitterness of nettle and the ghost of salt as lessons in patience and purpose. Even silence became part of the meal, as necessary as broth, as warming as fire. At dawn, the tide whispered against stone. Walked barefoot on frost-dusted sand, seaweed bundle in hand. She knelt at the edge of the world and flung the offering into the surf. The waves swallowed it without thanks. She spoke softly to the sea words older than language, a treaty renewed. This wasn't superstition. It was symmetry. They took from the sea. They gave to the sea. The first fruits of the tide were always returned, a gesture of humility before the deep. The sea was provider and patron, as volatile as it was generous. By honoring it, they secured not just luck, but right relationship. Children watched from dunes as foam curled around kelp roots and drifted away. They treated the ocean as kin, capable of mood, memory, and favor. Ritual didn't separate survival from reverence. It wove them together like rope from twine. On the darkest night of midwinter, they prepared the salted porridge. Thick, spiced, and steaming. It wasn't meant to be eaten. It was meant to be offered. One spoonful per home, cast at the threshold with quiet intention. Steam rose in the moonlight as each portion arced through the air and landed softly on wood and stone. No one spoke during the act. The silence was the point. Every doorstep became altar. Every bowl, a ward. They believed in spirits not always malevolent, but hungry. And hunger made anything dangerous. By feeding the unseen, they protected the seen. They sealed their homes with ritual, not locks. This small gesture carried communal hope into the hardest weeks of the year. It said, "We remember, we care, we are not alone." And when winds moaned through the village like forgotten ghosts, the porridge sat waiting soft, spiced shields against despair. Harvest didn't end at collection, it deepened into preservation. Villagers joined hands to raise root cellars, stacking stone and hauling earth. The labor was slow, the rhythm steady. No one built alone. And once the meat hung above the smoke, watch was kept. Every family took shifts, stoking embers and turning racks. The scent of brine and hickory curled into night, signaling not just food but duty. Kinship was forged in that smoke. Jars sealed with beeswax became tokens of shared burden. Straw bundles passed hand-to-hand fuel for fire and for friendship. Each preserved root recalled fellowship's solidarity, measured not in wealth, but in warmth. Work was worship. And the smokehouse, its creaking beams and constant heat, stood as the true hearth of the village. What they saved together, they endured together. Thora's hands moved with precision, tossing nettle and beetroot into the brew. She added a pinch of dried dandelion, stirred clockwise, and covered the pot. Beside her, honey slowly dripped from a carved spoon into wooden cups. Birch resin was already laid out for chewing, its sharp scent rising in curls. Food here wasn't just nourishment, it was medicine. They didn't wait for illness. They brewed prevention into daily ritual. A sip of this, a chew of that. Health was something to be maintained, not chased. Children drank their tonics with faces scrunched. Elders murmured blessings over each cup. No one wasted a drop. Even bitter herbs were sweetened by purpose. Food became cure, not just for body, but for fear. In those potions, there was assurance that someone knew what to do, that care had been baked into every crust and stewed into every bowl. Night settled. The hearth glowed. Bowls of stew passed hand to hand as stories rose with the steam. Thora's voice, low and musical, wove through the room. She spoke of long winters weathered on dried kelp and broth, of children kept warm by barley cakes in their pockets. Laughter crackled like kindling. A tale of sour honey and a greedy fox. A shipwrecked uncle who survived on fish-scale tea. Dr. Signe Martinson's voice echoed from later years. They imbued every meal with meaning. Fear of famine turned into feast of fellowship. Every bite was a memory. Every recipe, a thread of lineage. Their forgotten foods carried not just nutrients but stories, survival strategies, and social bonds. They consumed more than calories. They took in identity. Around the fire, they didn't just eat soup. They stirred in legacy, swallowed folklore, and exhaled belief. Flames flickered across their faces, warming both belly and spirit, as food became communion. The earth itself became a pantry. Beneath sod and stone, root cellars were buried deep, their walls lined with peat and layered with flat rock. Inside, wooden barrels sat half-swallowed by shadow, packed tight with salted roots, fermented cabbage, and greens no longer visible but still alive. Air never warmed beyond a chill breath. Even in midwinter, the temperature held between 2 and 5 degrees, a miracle of moss and patience. Each layer was used from the top down. The deepest, untouched until late spring, seemed to pulse with promise. Close your eyes down there, and you could smell its sweet rot, temps of brine, and the mineral sharpness of stored life. Behind every winter stew was this quiet chamber, a place where time was folded, not frozen. Where summer's memory lived on, barrel by barrel. Above ground, survival clung to rafters. In smokehouses and barns, strings of fish and meat hung like dark pennants, their skins hardened by sun and flame. The fire below smoked slow and steady, never raging, only breathing. As the weeks passed, flesh absorbed smoke's phenols, a quiet chemistry that kept mold at bay. When the fire slept, the low winter sun took over. In high-beamed barns, flat root slices lay across woven racks. They shriveled into jerky under cold light, wind teasing out moisture, while time locked in nutrients. The scent of pine smoke curled between beams. You could taste it in every bite of dried cod, every sinew of venison. This was survival taught by elements: smoke's warmth, sun's restraint, wind's whisper. Meat became memory, sealed by glow and draught. Down by the rocky coast, salt shimmered in carved basins, evaporated from seawater, gathered in slates, and scraped into woven sacks. The crystals were sharp and vital. In kitchens and by fire pits, handfuls of salt met sliced cabbage, grated beet, and shredded greens. They pressed them deep into barrels, weighted with stones, then left them to bubble and burp. Within days, life began to stir. Invisible colonies of lactic bacteria woke up, feasting on sugars, transforming vegetables into something tangy, complex, and safe. Salt kept the rot away. The microbes kept the nutrients alive. Through long months of darkness, these jars held what the body craved most: vitamin C, iron, brightness. Tiny bubbles rose from cabbage seams, whispering beneath tight lids. It wasn't just food, it was culture, both microbial and human. A science known before it had a name, a taste of vitality in the depths of bleakness. Some ingredients arrived with warning. Lichen, foraged when food ran low, could kill if taken raw. So Thora boiled them. Once, twice, 3 times. Each pan of yellow water poured off and replaced. What remained after was soft, translucent, gelatinous in the hand, and nourishing to the gut. This was not desperation cooking. It was deliberate, practiced care. Knowing what to strip away, what to keep. Children watched her with wide eyes, the smell bitter and earthy, almost metallic. By the 3rd boil, the air softened. What was once danger became dinner because someone remembered the right ritual. Mushrooms demanded negotiation. Not all were friendly. Some needed leaching through ashlie, others soaked for hours over juniper-soaked water. Thora would gather them fresh and set to work, grinding them, washing again and again. Cold hands, sharp nose, one mistake could cost a life. The tools were simple wooden bowls, carved ladles, coiled reeds to strain the broth, but the stakes were high. The lye turned dark. Ash settled like silt at the bottom. Juniper scented the air like incense in a temple of caution. Decoding nature's poisons required trust in knowledge passed down. In rituals repeated without question, in the stubborn will to survive. Deep in the cellar, within the shadows of barrels and stone, another life pulsed. Microscopic army stalactic, fermenters, the yeast, the preserving molds, labored, unseen. They transformed food not only into something safe, but into something new. The cabbage didn't just last, it got stronger, brighter, tangier. The greens didn't spoil, they evolved. Professor Marcus Reed would later call it a living lab. These people weren't simply storing food, they were coaching microbes, nurturing ecosystems, tuning barrels like instruments of preservation. Each lid lifted in spring was the end of an experiment. Each bowl served was a taste of successful transformation. But not all knowledge survived the march of time. When the age of wide fields came, when ploughs cleared peatlands and monoculture took hold, diversity withered. Cereal grains filled bellies but emptied the forest of its staples. Linger and moss, lichen and rutile fell out of use. Riches, too wild, too laborious, too strange. Root cellars were left to rot. New barns rose over drained wetlands. The smell of fermentation gave way to the uniform scent of stored grain. What had once nourished entire communities now vanished into memory meals, lost not because they failed, but because they didn't fit the new idea of efficiency. Over 1,000 native plants disappeared from the European diet within 5 centuries. Each vanished flavor carried knowledge with it about soil, seasons, sickness, and healing. But not everything stayed forgotten. Today, at the edges of cities and within remote valleys, rewilding has begun. Ethnobotanists scatter ancient grain across test plots. Community festivals celebrate wild greens, nettle stews, and lichen cakes. Children plant roots in wooden boxes labeled with names from 1,000 years ago. Jars reappear on shelves. marked foraged 980 AD. Their contents sour and strange and wonderful. Some taste them and grimace. Others smile and recognize something wordless. Dr. Ingrid Falk walks between rows of heirloom crops and speaks softly. Today's lost crops tell the story of lost knowledge, rescued only by rewilding efforts. In the final sequence, the camera traces the journey of a route from forest floor to forager's hand. From the boiling pot to the peat cellar, from the quiet dark to the stew pot, from bowl to breath, an unbroken chain, once almost lost, now glimmering again in firelight. Ancient preservation illuminated by modern curiosity. Not a return, but a remembering. In a patch of reclaimed earth between city buildings, stalks of barley rise beside seaweed beds and nettle thickets. The garden buzzes softly, hands in soil, boots pressing paths, voices low with intent. Children help elders plant heritage grain, their fingers pushing emmer and rye seeds into loamy beds. Nearby, water drains naturally through gravel-lined trenches, mimicking old field wisdom. This is no ordinary garden. It's a memory field revived. We scour world markets for superfoods, a voice reflects, yet Vikings thrived on wild harvests grown close to home. Can we learn from their lost pantry? There's something grounding about watching old grains bend in wind again, especially when they once fed an entire people through frost and famine. Connection returns, not through myth, but through dirt under nails and the quiet return of plants once forgotten. At a seed bank in the north, ancient grains germinate under lead warmth. Emmer, spelt, and medieval rye rise in trays. Nearby, bakers sift flour from these first harvests, the dust rising like breath from the past. Dough forms under strong hands, folded into rounds, left to rise in baskets. These grains are resilient, the narrator explains. Bred for harsh climates, poor soils, little rain. What they lack in yield, they make up in hardiness. A clay oven glows. Bread rises with a scent deeper than wheat, something primal. A loaf is torn open. The crumb is dense, the taste nutty. Heritage barley yields less than modern hybrids. Yes, but it asks far less of the land. Fewer fertilizers, less water, more forgiveness. In an open-air workshop, a forager leads a group into a coastal grove. They crouch by frosted nettle, identifying young shoots. Beside tidal pools, someone harvests kelp with shears. Roots tugged from frozen soil glisten in baskets. Laughter rises as someone mistakes a weed for a wild leek and learns quickly why taste tests matter. Nettle pesto, seaweed crisps, lichen broth, this is no gimmick. These are survival foods, once daily staples, now dressed in curiosity and awe. And in learning to eat them again, people rediscover how to see the land not just as scenery, but as pantry. Nettle, pesto, and seaweed chips aren't fads, says the voice. They're echoes of resilience, survival, packed in every bite. Mortar grind herbs against old stone. A fire crackles in the distance. Knowledge, once nearly extinct, is spoon-fed back into the world. Inside a community kitchen, cabbage crunches beneath bare hands. Beet juice stains fingers deep red as it's packed with salt into glass jars. The group presses down gently, then watches, waiting for bubbles to rise. Fermentation has begun. Sauerkraut, kavos, kimchis, these aren't trends. They're legacies. Viking vats, repurposed for winter survival, are feeding us again. There's excitement in the tang of sour brine. People sip from jars, wrinkle noses, then smile. Laughter spills into the corridor. It's more than preservation, it's celebration. Fermented foods retain half again as much vitamin C. They don't just store nutrients, they store vitality. The jars go on a shelf, marked Winter Resilience. You can hear the airlocks burping quietly. That's the sound of nutrition growing stronger in the dark. Beneath a canopy of pine, volunteers study a blueprint scratched onto a plank of reclaimed wood. The drawing is simple. A root cellar, Viking style, built from stone, peat, and patience. They begin digging near a tree line, setting the stakes, laying the frame. Barrels appear. One for squash, one for carrots, one for cabbages still caked in soil. Peat is pressed round their bases, and a moisture seal is applied by hand, just as it would have been 1,000 years ago. These low-tech, low-energy cellars mimic Viking designs, the narrator explains. And they work just as well today. Thermometers are buried. Airtight lids are checked. And in that dim, cold storage, modern hopes are placed on ancient wisdom. Biodiverse diets protect against crop failure, Dr. Paula Reyes reminds us. Preserving variety isn't romantic, it's resilient. Outback, compost steams in the morning, chill, nettle stems, vegetable ends, and kraut trimmings tumble into a heap. Someone pours in ash water, just like Thora once did, and stirs the mass with a wooden pitchfork. The scent is rich, almost sweet. They didn't waste, the voice notes. Ash, weeds, bones, everything had a place. Today we compost, but they composed. From that dark mass comes soil. From soil, new life. In raised beds, green sprouts emerge that carry the memory of old meals and the promise of new ones. Regeneration isn't just ecologically esculture in a firelit courtyard. Chef Magnus Johansson places a dish on a carved plate. Barley flat cake with whipped seaweed butter and pickled onion. Guests lift bites, taste slowly. Expressions, shifts, surprise, nostalgia, reverence. These aren't just ingredients, the chef says, they're lifelines. In climate stress, they're the flavors we'll turn to. The bread is dense, slightly sweet. The butter holds sea brine and umami. It fills the mouth without heaviness. A flavor rooted in history, but reaching forward. Barley flatcakes offer 200 calories a serving, with wild-sourced minerals baked in. It's not just food, it's defense. Not just nutrition, but narrative. To rewild our kitchens, we start with one recipe, one ritual, one seed. And so it ends under strings of lights in a courtyard garden. Bowls of pickled roots, grilled nettles, and seaweed barley stew pass from hand to hand. Laughter cuts through the chill. Elders speak gently to children. Someone raises a glass of beet kvass in toast. Their forgotten foods can feed our future, says the voice. If we dare to forage, ferment, and feast again. At the far end of the table, a girl places a label on a jar, Rewilded 2025. Her hands are still stained from soil. In each harvest shared, each jar sealed, and each story retold, resilience returns. Not as myth, but as method. Not as nostalgia, but as nourishment. With each step back into wild tradition, we recover something more vital than ingredients. We recover belonging. Dawn returns with a hush. A light mist lingers over the land as smoke curls once more from S chimney. Inside her turf-walled cottage, the old rhythm stirs again. Baskets line the entryway, brimming with seaweed, root clusters still dusted with earth, and jars faintly fogged with fermentation. The cook fire hasn't yet caught, but warmth already blooms in the promise of the day. She kneels near the hearth, setting aside juniper sprigs and pulling out a pot of nettle barley porridge from the embers. The steam rises, scented with salt and green. Outside, the snow hasn't melted, but inside, the scent is spring. Roots, sea greens, and fermented leaves. They weren't peasant scraps, but survival gold, the voice reflects. The foods we forgot were the foods that kept them alive. Astrid, now the cook's daughter, ladles porridge into wooden bowls. Around her, the family gathers, no rush, only quiet expectancy. Hands reach, a candle is lit. The meal begins, not with words, but with breath. Gratitude is baked into every motion. Elsewhere, in another time, a modern forager crouches by a rocky shoreline. Her hands move deftly, trimming bladderwrack from stone with the same care once used. The tide laps against her boots. This moment, this harvestee's echo, ritual, return. They trusted the wild when fields froze, the voice continues. They turned poison into provision. Their ingenuity fed whole communities and can nourish us still. She stands, kelp bundled under her arm, and looks toward the horizon, not searching, but remembering. Back in the cottage, a jar is sealed. A sprig of nettle rests beside it, green and small, but defiant against frost. Next time you walk ashore or forest, the narrator invites, look for the lost flavors of survival and taste history on your tongue. The camera lingers on the wooden table, where the lone sprig of nettle sits like punctuation. Frost dances on the window beyond, but inside, warmth endures. In that tiny leaf, hunger and healing, scarcity and resilience, memory and hope. A green promise, quiet but unbroken, linking past and future in one breath.